Hello there, product people. Welcome to the show that supercharges your abilities to become better thinkers, makers, and leaders. I'm your host, Alsawi, and I'm thrilled to have you join me for this exciting episode of Product People. In this episode, we'll explore the impact of data on our lives, from demystifying complex terms to navigating the balance between data-driven decisions and intuition. We delve into the process of turning raw data into actionable insights. We'll speak about the art of storytelling with data, learn from real-world data misuse in decision-making, and explore ethical considerations, collaboration dynamics, and future career paths in the data industry. So whether you're a data professional, a product person, or simply someone curious about the role of data in shaping our day-to-day lives, you're in the right place. As always, you can expect an honest conversation, valuable insights, and meaningful advice that can fuel your own journey with product, design, and leadership. Let's dive right in. Today, we have a passionate analytics leader on a mission to make data simple to use, easy to understand, and readily available. Over the last 15 years, he has worked with multiple organizations across the globe, helping businesses create better customer experiences, launch new products, and build lasting relationships. He believes that data is the connective tissue that can break down organizational silos and foster greater collaboration, and sees himself as a data entrepreneur who is constantly discovering opportunities to improve and grow. He's also a big food enthusiast who loves exploring international cuisines. Without further ado, let's welcome Rohit Dhawan to Product People. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Elsavi. Thank you so much.
I want to start with some basics. I'm very curious about maybe a bit of your story. What drew you to the world of data, and how do you see its impact on people's lives?
Yeah, sounds good. So my data journey started almost about 15 years ago. That's when I completed my master's and I got into my first job. Now, my first job was all about acting as a business analyst, where I was trying to get these functional requirements from my business, changing it into technical documents, and then having my developers pull out the data that the business had needed. Now, at that point in time, what was itching my curiosity is, what are these developers do? How do they write something in English and this data comes out really fast and then business uses this? So I was really drawn to that element. And then what I did was I started working really closely and observing these folks. And I was very lucky to be working with this bunch of people who showed me what we now call as coding and the platforms that use to help us get the data out. From there on, I spent a couple of months learning what coding is, how to code in some languages, and how to pull the data, where to pull the data from. But then eventually I started thinking that, doing coding is one thing, but I think the beauty of this is actually using the data. So from my first job, it led me to my second job, which was with a credit card company, which was all about data. Everything they did was about data. And I think that's what really started me loving data and helped me create a career out of it. Now, in terms of the impact that I see data is pretty much omniverse, right? So it impacts everybody wherever you are at. Two big things, especially in this modern life, that I am seeing, and as an individual in this field, I really observe, which really impresses me, the data has been able to do. One is how it is all about creating curated, personalized experience. Whether you're trying to order a coffee on your app, whether you're trying to relax by listening to your music on your streaming services, or whether you're just looking for a movie to watch, the data with all your interactions that you're having is helping the organization curate such a personalized experience that you get to do what you like proactively. The second thing, if I may just stretch it a bit to say, I also see that data playing an important element in people having to change how they live. Key example there is wearable fitness trackers. It's such a great example on how a lot more people are getting aware of what their health, fitness routine, dietary routines should be. And not only this democratization of data to the customer is helping them know, but it's also nudging them to do something about it. So I think irrespective of who you are, data does play a very important role in our everyday life.
Thank you for that intro. I want to unpack some terms because I think it's important that we start demystifying or align on some of our understanding. So we often hear terms like machine learning, generative AI, data science, even more recently prompt engineering, predictive analytics. And those terms are thrown around a lot. And it's in the realm of data. We often hear people throwing around these terms. And in a lot of cases, it's with a severe misunderstanding on what they actually mean. So I was hoping you can help unpack for our listeners, for myself, how the different data disciplines contribute specifically to extracting value from data, similar to the value that you described for a customer. But I just want to get your maybe perspective on helping someone understand the different disciplines and then help bring that clarity on how they come together to extract value from data.
Yeah, Savi, that's a great question. Especially today when words like chat GPT are becoming household phenomenon, that's a great question. So, the way I look at all these elements that you've just spoken is in terms of their evolution. Now, when I speak of evolution, if we measure it in terms of the questions that we are trying to answer and the complexity of data and the volume of data required to answer those questions, and if we were to draw a spectrum, on one side of spectrum would be what we used to do in past using spreadsheets or with the advent of business intelligence and self-serve visualization platforms. And on the other extreme end of the spectrum would be these more recent phenomenons like AI and specifically generative AI, of which ChatGPT is an example of. So let's decompress all these terms on this spectrum. Now, a while ago, the data needs were very simple. The type of questions people were asking is to just get an understanding of, say, how many customers do we have? What are the sales we are making? What would the weather look like? Is my favorite team playing today, or how have they done in the past? Now, to do all of these, the data that we were getting in was a bit more simpler to decrypt, easier to clean, and then you could either use instruments like a spreadsheet or with the advent of these business visualization, which is called as the business intelligence, you could give these answers back to the business. When the organization started to modernize a bit, they had these capabilities to not only collect a lot of data, but even process that. That's where we got into this era called as advanced analytics. Now, during these period, what people were asking question is not just a very high level summary of the business, but they were also trying to get a little more insights, deeper insights, which is what are the behaviors of our clients? Do we see any patterns in the transactions or elements that we see? And even to take it forward, what is the root cause and effect between different things that we see happening today? And that's where things became really popular with advanced analytics. After that, what happened? This buzzword almost hit everybody in analytics called as big data. Now, what happened was there was this explosion in the amount of data that the organizations could collect, and even from the sources it could collect. The data was now not simpler anymore. It became a lot more complex, a lot more unstructured, started coming in a lot of different formats. Now, when we think of data, we usually think of it as numbers, but now we started looking into text strings. What were people searching for? What were people complaining for? And what are the pain points of the clients? What are they raving about? When all of this data started coming in, there was a need to be able to ingest this new stream of data, both in terms of volume and complexity, and make the most of it. That's where we got
Mm.
into the era of machine learning and what we call as AI. Machine learning is basically instead of an individual or a human trying to ingest that data, there is a line of codes which we call as algorithms. We run those algorithms on the data and they have the ability to go through this vast amount of structured or unstructured data and throw some insights back for manual interpretation. And these use cases became for machine learning were what we'd wanted to do was like in terms of credit adjudication or risk or fraud prevention. Those were the areas where they were heavily involved with. More recently, what we are seeing is now question that people are trying to ask is not only predict what we want to do for the client, but being able to generate content basis the interactions we are having with them almost on a real time basis. Now, which is known as generative AI, wherein what happens is what we call as artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is nothing but machine learning on steroids, where the machine does the not only the ingestion of data for you, it naturally looks into a feedback mechanism so that it can make itself a lot more better in answering the questions and generate the content that the user is looking for. So that's how I sort of look at all of
Mhm.
these terminologies.
So you mentioned a couple of interesting factors here. There's the data itself, and you spoke about perhaps the complexity. One example you gave was around the format, the process, the complexity of the data. You also mentioned the goal or the question that someone might have and how complex that question or that goal might be. And also, very interconnected, there was the idea of the decision that you're trying to make. So you said something around manual intervention or manual interpretation to make some sort of decision. Looking at these factors, I want to understand from you if there is a process. If you're speaking to someone and you're trying to explain the process on how do you transform raw data around a specific scope into an actionable insight, something that I can understand. And perhaps maybe tell us your definition of what an insight is versus what data is, but then walk us through the process. If there is a process, what are the steps? How do I take some raw data, think about the elements that you've mentioned before, and turn it into actionable insights?
And one thing I really like about you is how you speak about the actionable insights, because that's what at the end of the day it's all about. So there definitely is a process involved in making it from raw data to information to insights. Now, before I get into the technical part of it, let's create a simple example out of it.
Okay.
So as an individual, like I usually like to start my day with having ordering a coffee from my favorite restaurant. So my day starts with ordering the coffee, and then I'm usually trying to take public transport where I would flash my card, get on the train, go to the work. And then in the office, I usually like to have lunch with my colleagues. So we go out, we use my debit or credit card to make a payment. And then usually when I'm returning from home, mostly you will find me hearing to podcasts, or you will help me seeing buying groceries while I'm on a train. Now the reason why I'm giving this example is because what's happening is every time a person has a lot of interaction, at each interaction data is getting generated. Just in a simple example, there were so many instances where this data got generated. The amazing thing about this is it's getting generated in a lot of different systems. So when we look at raw data, the first thing that we have to look at it is there needs to be a systemic method where the data from all these isolate systems which don't necessarily speak to each other is create condensed and stored somewhere locally. So that's the very, very first step, which is called as the collection of data. Now, as you would appreciate that all these different interactions are across different systems have different ways of creating data, storing data, labeling data, and formatting data. So the very first raw data that we get, the reason why it's called raw is because A, it is not systemized at all. Different systems have their different nomenclatures, definitions. So what needs to happen is once the data is collected, somebody needs to go in and clean that data up. So the second step in the process is cleaning up of that data, which usually involves what we are trying to do is we are trying to systemize everything that we've received, and we are trying to use the elements to create association. Now, what that means is these isolate data points are only useful for me if I can at the end of the day say, oh, by the way, all of this data was related to Rohit, and now we know a little more about Rohit. So that's the element of association that needs to happen on how do we join these disparate data who don't speak to each other and create it at a user level. Then there are a lot of other things that happens during this process wherein we check for data qualities, data anomalies, if there are any outliers or formatting issues. All of that good work happens in the second process step, which is the cleaning of the data. Now once this data is cleaned, and bear in mind I'm just calling it data right now because it's just the point element in space. What happens is it needs to be made available to downstream users who will actually try to draw more meaning out of it. Now, by the time it goes to the third phase, which is where analysts, the community of analysts, whether you call it data scientists, whether you call them data analysts, gets an access to this information. And I'm also assuming that in between, all the elements of data governance, compliance were taken care of so that it's now readily available for a community that can make the most out of it. So, as an analyst, I now have an enormous wealth of data available to me. So, what do I do with it? To make it usable, one of the first things that I personally encourage everyone is the first starting point should not be the data, but it should be an understanding of your business, right? When you've known a bit about your business, what are the business run? What are the pain points that the client faces? What are the things that we want to do that will help enrich their experience with your organization? It becomes really important to mine those golden nuggets that are layered between this enormous data wealth. Now, once you've got that hook of what is the end goal with which what you want to fish this data out and draw some insights, then what starts to happen is we start converting this data into information. And the way we do this is, what will happen is somebody will go into the system, they will write a bunch of codes, draw information, try to summarize that information, create some visualizations or the chart, and at that point in time it takes its first transformation from data to information. Because now what's happening is we are now starting to draw some patterns and elements together, and we are trying to infer something out of what the data was about to tell us. Even at this point in time, I like to refer it as information, but what we want to do is, as partners to our business, we want to generate insights, and more importantly, actionable insights. And how does happen is, once you've mined this information out of your data and you have that pre-hand knowledge of how to make your customer's life better, what you want to do is start figuring out the reasons of why something happened, and then what is that data telling you about that individual that can help you overcome the pain points or amplify the positive experiences that they were having. So, if I now go back to my initial example of where I gave you my day routine, and if I now put into the perspective of personalization, if as a business we want to make life simpler for our client so that we know what sort of music they hear, what sort of coffee they like to order, we can use all that information and try to create a really curated, personalized experience from them whenever they're having those interactions with the organization's environment. I think that, in
Okay.
a short, is a process of how it goes from raw data to an actionable insight.
Okay. I was taking notes as you were speaking, and I really like how you said it actually starts with the outcome that you're trying to achieve. It might be a question that you're looking to answer, or it might be a business goal, or an end goal, or an outcome that you're trying to drive. From there, what I gathered is it starts with collection. It's still at what you call the raw data stage. There's a second step. It goes through a process of cleanup, systemization, and QA. And after that, it goes into a step around connections, associations, linking, I guess ideally to that end goal, linking that data. I'm hoping that, of course, it's all relevant in the process until it gets to what you called moving it from data into information, or now becomes more information once that happens, which could manifest in things like visualization. And then finally, or maybe not finally, one before finally, is surfacing that data, making it available for the individuals that had the end goal, had the question to begin with, but surfacing also in an appropriate manner where there's considerations on what parts of the data are available and who is it available to. And then comes the decision. I was trying to recap what I heard from you. Is that some sort of an accurate description of the process? Was there anything that you may want to tweak or add or remove from it?
I think you've got it. And I think the key here is, which I think you got it really well, is starting with an end goal in mind. So
Mm,
that's really important for any data analyst to make the most out of, from the data to the information to the insight and actionable insight journey.
okay. I want to move on to kind of an area or a topic that I hear some debates around, but it's the classic debate between analytical thinking and intuition.
Hmm.
Making decisions based on data, based on sometimes numbers, facts, objective information, versus trusting your gut and going with a gut instinct. And I think there's definitely value in both. But I want to get your thoughts on how might people, especially professionals that are playing with data, that are using data on daily basis and as part of their jobs, how do they balance this data driven decision making with using their product intuition or gut instinct when it's applicable?
Yeah, that's a great question again. So, from my perspective, I think both the data and the instinct or intuition go pretty much hand in hand. And the reason why I say that is because I've been in numerous presentations where I've sort of had this really amazing data insights and story to tell to my business, and then somebody's really given me a perspective. A senior business leader who's been in the business for their life has given me some really amazing perspective on how to do more or less with what I was telling them. So, with
Mm.
those experiences in mind, I've sort of got to this conclusion that while data tells you the hard facts, the intuition probably gives you a perspective of what questions to ask. Now, while the data has this beauty to tell you the trends or the patterns, an intuition can probably do a sense check to say, does it make sense? Does it make right? Are we looking at the whole picture, or do we need to add something more on top of it or not? Right.
Mm.
So I think both of them, in my mind, is less of a tug of a war, but both of them tag team to move forward. And an example that comes to my mind here is, let's think of an e-commerce website, which is digital only website, has its web platform as well as an app platform. And now over a course of their life, they decide to redo their entire website. And what they want to do is they want to do a very different simplified version, completely change their homepage, put in new banners, pictures, text. So a fundamental redesign of how they've looked and feel before. For something like this, right, data can only go as far as to tell them, if you've never done it in the past, there is no data available to actually let us know how the consumer will react to it. The second thing that I also feel is, it's also at times where organizations do is, in these scenarios, they will try to harp on some external research, but then that research is good. Does it apply to your core customer base? Again, the data can only go as far as to answer those questions. So at that point in time, it really comes down to working very closely with your product, with your designers, with all your marketing professionals, and everybody, to get them in a room and say, this is what we want to do. What do you think from a business perspective makes sense for us to do? Right.
Mm.
And for my mind, that's a brilliant example of how data can collaborate with any sort of a instinct or a gut feeling to actually accomplish the design, accomplish the mission of that organization, to revamp and for a better customer journey for them.
One of the things that I hear about a lot, and I wanted to get your perspective on, is the way we're speaking about data right now is mostly quantitative data, right? Like we're talking about quantitative data that typically people think of as a way to understand the what is happening. Sometimes, you hear I wouldn't say an argument, but you hear the perspective on, yes, that's great. That's going to help us understand what is happening, and it's going to help us create some additional insights on the what, but it's not necessarily going to tell us why. It's not going to tell us why is someone behaving that way, like especially with anomalies or maybe novel products like you mentioned. How do you see the qualitative and quantitative, sort of playing on the previous question about data driven versus intuition, but also thinking about qualitative and quantitative working together?
Yeah, and I think it's really important for someone to have that uh, perspective when they're doing any sort of a data exploration or insight generations to help the business. As I said, when we look at the data can tell us about what the historic trends are, right?
Mm.
It can tell us about the patterns, what we've observed in the past. It can also at times suggest some root and cause of things. More recently, we started using these historic trends to predict in the future. of what the natural outcome could be if we were to have an altered experience or launch a new product or a feature for the client, which is where we spoke of the machine learnings and the AIs come into being. But I think what's also starting to happen is bringing in that human approach as an overarching theme to what data is suggesting. What I've started here, a lot of organizations do now is, while they want to be investing in giving the best product or the experience to the client, the conversations are now shifting to say, how do we put the client in the middle and think of what happens in their life cycle, in their journey, and how can we partner on that life journey for the client to make the most value out of a relationship that an organization has to offer for them. So, in that light, if the objective of the organization is to be a client centric organization, it's really, really important to have both that qualitative and quantitative approach and have an human, human centric overarching theme to drive your decisions and drive most value for your clients.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to take a short break. And when we're back, I'll be asking Rohit about storytelling with data, and we'll go from there. Hey there, my amazing product people. If you're trying to find your own story with product, design, and leadership, gain a new perspective on being human in a soulless corporate world, and possibly have a good laugh in the process, you can grab your very own copy of my latest book, Product People, A Journal of Laughter and Tears. It's available on Amazon in all formats right now. Happy reading. All right, let's continue where we left off. I wanted to ask you about storytelling with data. Just that statement alone kind of combines this idea of narrative, having a story, having a human, compelling, relatable, empathetic story, but doing it with data. How might we craft a compelling narrative around data or using data? And in your mind, also make sure that it resonates with the audience, because the story is always for someone. So how do we go about doing that, and then potentially as an outcome drive actionable insight from all of this?
So, when I hear about this storytelling concept, right, the first thing that comes to my mind is the ability of the narrator to connect to its audience and leave a lasting impact, leave them with wanting for more. Now, I think this is universally applies to everything that you do, whether you watch a movie, whether you watch read a
Mm-hmm.
book, or you listen to a music or your favorite artist. There is a bit of storytelling in each of those elements. The same principle also applies to a data analyst doing his or her job. When I break down the storytelling, and by the way, when I say storytelling, I think usually people think of it as a PowerPoint version, but I want to say that storytelling can happen agnostic of your platform, whether you're using your PowerPoints, your Word, your spreadsheets. Irrespective of the platform, the principles remain the same. Now, when I think of storytelling, it has three very simple parts for me: the beginning, the middle, and the end. Now, let's decompress this in more from an analytics perspective. The beginning is usually what is your business objective or a business problem, or what is a client pain point that you want to solve for, right? So there needs to be a very, very strong understanding on why we are narrating this story, number one. The middle part, which I think is the most meatiest of the part, is all the good work or the magic that the analyst has created to drive their point forward to say, knowing what our objective was, this is what the data is, which supports, this is what my uh, insights about this is, and this is what we recommend to get done. And finally, the end. And I think end is really important, because towards the end, what we want to do in our storytelling is we want to not only leave the group by showing them what the data tells them or a bunch of a charts, but we really want to tell them on how to use these insights, which will eventually draw into some actions or tactics that will help you accomplish the business objective that we started with. So this is how I usually sort of break down my
Mhm.
storytelling whenever I am interacting or doing any data work for my audience.
Thank you. Okay, so you mentioned a couple of things there, and I think it's perfect because I wanted to ask you about something related. What I'm trying to piece together is better understand where things go wrong. You mentioned a lot of great examples, things about personalized experiences. I personally used to also during my commute used to have an app on my phone that would prompt me at the same time every day, and it would just use the default bias and basically ask me to confirm if I want the same thing that I order every single day, and it would just be a click away, and it had all my information, so it made it much easier. There's obviously lots of good examples when it relates to things like convenience, better experiences, and so on. But I also would say that there are some not very great examples, especially when the question itself maybe is not the right question, or it could be that the data interpretation is not done. I'm using the word right here loosely, but it's not done effectively. Or maybe the story and also the conclusion and the lesson that you take from it is also one that is not optimal for people and may have a negative impact. So I wanna get first your perspective on data or usage of data gone wrong, and if you can share a story from your experience, and obviously feel free to redact any names or details, but I want to hear a story around that because I think it's something also on a lot of people's minds when we hear about all these amazing things that understanding or giving your data away can do for you, but also be aware of maybe the negative consequences. So love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question again. I might answer it slightly differently if that's okay with you,
Sure.
because I do believe that as much as data is valuable and enormous wealth, in certain situations, right, it can only do as much, and that's where the other elements have to kick in, whether it's your gut intuition, whether it's your product knowledge, or whether it's your general understanding of the human being. Before I actually get into that, your question reminded me of an incident that happened back in days when I was just starting with it. So a while ago, when it was probably my second or third job, and we were
Mhm.
working with this e-commerce company, we came out with a new concept that if clients were putting something in their cart and they were not making a purchase, then we would just send them a nudge to say, seems like you liked it, and how would you like to go about it?
Mhm.
Now, what we thought was we got the data right, and we knew what the client had done, and we actually communicated back to the clients who we thought had done the action the data was telling us. A couple of weeks into that, we got a very interesting client feedback. The client in this case called up the service center and said, by the way, I received that email. In that email, you've sent me a high boot. I don't wear high boots. And you sent me an image that was black in color, and black is not even my favorite color. So, which was like, it was a
Mhm.
pretty interesting, interesting insight. Now, the way you could look at this is obviously it put a smile to our face into the details the clients led to go into. But then, if you introspect into what could have gone wrong, is what you were saying. We looked at the data and we thought the data was telling us something and we could make the client experience better. But in essence, it's not what the client actually wanted. And in terms of having them get a better experience, obviously, it probably added as an irritant for them to come back to us and shop with us again. So I think these things happen in the real world. It just happens. Now, fast forward it today. Now, what I usually recommend doing is whenever we are doing something really new, which is enormous or drastic enough to the tune of its novelty has never been done before, or involves a high amount of a change, I usually recommend people to do something called as test and learn. Now, what usually happens in that approach is we've got these amazing tools and capabilities available, wherein, if, say, in the example that we were speaking about, somebody wants to do a redesign of their entire website and they're not sure on how the client would react to it, or whether it will drop their purchases or have a positive impact, instead of going full blown, just select a handful of clients and help them launch a version and collect real-time client feedback. Now, this feedback is much more important than any of your historical data that you would have used. This is how clients feel about the change you are going to make and eventually impact anything that you want to accomplish as organizational's KPI.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's always on my mind. I've read a lot of case studies on this topic. One in particular was about a pop company, soft drinks company. I'm not going to mention their name. And this was more than a decade ago. But what they did was using the weather data, they made their prices dynamic. So on a hot day where people are thirsty, they would price their drinks higher because people would want them. And on cooler days, they would be cheaper. And of course, the experiment ran, and it was a horrible outcome. And a lot of it was because people thought it was unfair. It's so the data might tell you, yes, like I mean, people are willing to pay more money maybe when they're thirsty, but taking advantage of it might not be something that you want to do from an ethical perspective. So that's I think where some of, I wouldn't say just the intuition, but some of the thinking around what kind of decisions are we making and what objective criteria comes in, and I think maybe guides how might we use our data without compromising the ethics around it. So I think the examples you mentioned are really great, and I also wanted to share this. And maybe speaking of sharing and collaborating, how do you see? So we spoke about collaboration. We spoke about at a high level qualitative versus quantitative data, working with product professionals, with business stakeholders. I want to get your thoughts on that collaboration. How do you see the collaboration between data professionals and maybe more precisely product teams?
Yeah.
So I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So for me, when I think of collaboration, I have a very simple formula. I call it as CTC. So care, trust, consistency. Now, in terms of I know you specifically asked me about analysts and the product community, but my core belief and principle is as long as a data professional, I show enough care towards my product partners to understand A, what they want to do, what are they currently doing, and what are their pain points, and how can I understand what they want to accomplish and invest sufficient amount of time and effort is the first element for me to show them the care. The second is the trust for me. Now trust is it's something that takes doesn't develop immediately, takes a bit of a time. You have to build a lot of relationships, work with them consistently, show them consistently that you care. And the third thing, which I think is very important, is consistency. It's easy to be a one hit wonder with your stakeholders or your relationships, but I think in the long run, what matters is how consistent you are in whatever you bring to the table as a value for your product partners. So I think as long as those three ingredients exist in a relationship, the collaboration is really healthy. Now, outside of that, what I'm also starting to see is that over the last few years, the amount of interaction and the dependencies between the team has been increasing a lot. Now, what that means is not only is that the product guys are interested in getting as much data as they want, the analyst is also interested in understanding about the products, because the whole discussion that is now happening is how do we make organizations more client centric, and you actually cannot do that without having a complete understanding of your client and how you want to actually offer what the client wants as they grow in experiences and tenure with your organization. It's a two-way street. It's maturing a lot, come a long way, and it continues to grow in good direction.
Okay, thank you. We spoke about change when we first started. We spoke about some trending or emerging trends and this rapid evolution in the data landscape. I want to get your thoughts on where do you see this going? What do you foresee as maybe emerging career paths within the data industry? Any skills or areas of expertise that would be on high demand? And where's the industry going?
So I think if anybody is thinking about being a data analyst, I think now is one of the most best time. The reason why I say that is for a couple of reasons. Back in the day when I started, there were only a few organizations that were really doing the data, leveraging data. So if you wanted to be a data professional, you were really constrained by your choices with the type of organizations that you could work in. Not saying that they are not good organization, it's just that it limits the option that the data professional had while starting or building their career. Now, fast forward it to today's, like data has exploded so much that there is no industry that is untouched by its presence. And hence, the demand for data analyst has sort of exploded a lot, which is also great news because now you're not constrained by the industry. If you have a passion in the industry you want to be, you can actually be in there. The other day, I was very interested in saying that I know that the sports teams usually do a lot of data crunching. I actually saw a lot of data analyst and data scientist roles coming up in MLS, which is the parent company that owns the Raptors and the Maple Leafs. So somebody is passionate about sports. Now you can combine your passion with your job and enjoy it a lot, and so on and so forth, right? If somebody's passionate about cars, and I know a lot of my friends, their kids who are graduating are very passionate about cars. All of this electric vehicles coming in that have the capability of autonomous driving are actually powered by AI, and again, immense potential of what you want to do. So I think from an industry perspective, the avenues are unlimited. Potential is unlimited, still to be tapped on. The second question you asked is about the skills. So I think, again, just to give you a comparison, back in time, your technical skills were really, really important for you to make a holding in the analyst community. Nowadays, I think it's slightly shifting in favor of both technical as well as your personality and your attitude that you bring to the organization. So what I've seen is, and it's very easy to Google the top 10 analytics skill in terms of data science and data analyst job. You can get it. It's definitely a mandate to get you foot in the door, to get your qualifications checkbox. But what a lot of hiring managers are right now looking at is a few things, if I can crystallize the top three. First, how open are you to actually understand your business? Spend some time there. Second, how much do you believe in continuous improvement and learning? Because as we've just discussed, that it's a very evolving field. Everything keeps changing frequently. So you need to have that appetite to be learning outside of your job also. And the third thing that I think is really important is, irrespective of whether you are a new graduate, a new professional, or a tenured professional, have a coach and mentor. These people will really help you be your guidepost in whatever professional journey you want to aim at.
Thank you for that. I guess the counter argument that we hear sometimes around getting into the data industry, just like you hear that sometimes also for different roles within design, within product, is the threat of AI, like some people might call it. Your thoughts on that? Like, how accurate is that? What does it replace? What does it not replace? Especially with the current climate, the current job market within tech, within digital, at least in North America. So, would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, first of all, I'm a big believer of AI as an enabler rather than something that will kill all the jobs that we are doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when looked in that spirit, I do believe that there will always be this element of human intervention that is required. So let me give you an example right now. So if anybody's interacted with Chat GPT, a brilliant tool, a brilliant innovation, but if you ask them a question, right, and it gives you back an answer, you still try to apply your human intuition to it to say, the question that I asked them, did the answer that I get back, is it
Mm-hmm.
what I need, or can I ask it to paraphrase or redo it again? And this is a very, very small example of how the consumer interact with the innovation like AI. If I look at from an employment perspective, now, while we were speaking of the machine learnings as well as the AI on an evolution spectrum, remember we spoke about the element of a feedback mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, while these AI driven engines have started to gain importance, a lot of organizations are still focused on machine learning as an primary driver of decisions in their organizations, with an element of human intervention. Now, why that human element is required is because at the end of the day, we want our models to be as accurate as possible in what we want to do. Now, in order to do that, there's always a feedback loop that's involved in it. And within that feedback loop, the humans, which are the data analysts or the data scientists, play an exceptionally important role. So that is why I think there is a huge enablement component that will help AI do a lot of things better. But the idea of it completely eliminating the human essence and the human knowledge, I sort of right now think it's a bit far fetched.
Okay, fair enough. Finally, for those who would like to learn more about your work and connect with you, how can they do so?
Yeah, I'm very openly available on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to drop in, say hi, more than happy to see you there. Yeah, and if you were to, and my wife told me this funny thing the other day. If you were to put my name in a search engine, it usually does come up in the first page. So that's another venue for me to look myself up.
Bringing it all back to data again. That's a perfect example. All right, Rohit. Well, to be honest, this conversation was very insightful, and I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your thoughts on the Product People podcast.
Thank you so much, Alsavi. I've truly enjoyed this conversation.
I want to express my sincere gratitude to our guest Rohit Dhawan for sharing his valuable insights on all things data. During our discussion, we explored the process of transforming raw data into actionable insights, the value of data-driven decision making, the art of storytelling with data, and the ethical considerations involved in using data. I found the insights to be practical and meaningful, and I hope you did too. I want to express my gratitude to all our listeners. Your support means the world to me. If you found today's episode valuable, please hit subscribe, leave a review, or share this podcast with your friends. I also encourage you to share your feedback and your ideas on what topics you'd like to hear about next on this podcast. Your input is very important as it helps me learn and improve. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes, and until next time, stay courageous, creative, and compassionate. Take care.